the Prophet Muhammad. A teacher at the school has been suspended. This morning, the Housing Secretary, Robert Jenrick, said he was deeply troubled that teaching material should be censored, describing the demonstrations as a matter of great concern. Sangeeta Kandola has the latest.
Behind the protesters, padlocks. Batsley School in West Yorkshire chained up and shut today. Pupils told to stay away over safety fears. Protesters, some parents of children here, some not, have planted themselves outside the school gates for a second day.
I'm not here to cause any trouble. I'm not here to cause any harm. Somebody insulted my prophet and it's important for me to come here.
They are angry after an image depicting the Prophet Muhammad was shown in a religious studies class earlier this week. The school has suspended the teacher, but tensions are still running high.
We do not accept that the school has taken this issue seriously. The teachers have breached the position of trust and failed their duty of safeguarding, and this issue must be addressed as a matter of urgency.
Today's demonstrations are considerably calmer than yesterday's. They were considered enough of a threat to close the school, switching pupils to remote learning. The government says they're disturbed by the gatherings.
The scenes outside the school gates, I think, are a cause of great concern to us. We don't want to see any teacher, member of staff, parent or pupil worried about passing through the gates of a school at the beginning of a day. That isn't the kind of country we are, and I would strongly encourage those people who are doing that in breach of the COVID guidelines to go home.
The Department of Education is in contact with the school. They're strongly encouraging dialogue between parents and teachers over the issue, whilst an independent investigation is now underway. Sangeeta Kandola, ITV News.
Our correspondent Ben Chapman is in Batley this lunchtime. Ben, clearly lots of anger about this and no sign of it dying down.
That's right, and while the protest here has ended, those people who were here earlier on are clearly not satisfied with the school's apology and with the teacher's suspension. That said, parents we've spoken to off camera who are also upset about what happened in the classroom here on Monday have said they don't support these protests, and in fact some of them say they're worried about saying that publicly because of fear of backlash. The Conservative peer Baroness Varsi has said today that she is concerned that this issue is being hijacked by extremists on both sides to fuel what she called a culture war at the expense of the pupils here, who after all have missed a day of school today. And it's true that beyond these school gates there is a debate being had about the balance to be struck between a teacher's freedom to teach and the sensitivity required in discussing some of these issues. A local mosque has extended an invitation to the teacher who showed the cartoons to come down to learn more about Islam, to learn why they were so offensive, and an imam has told me today that dialogue and education are the answer here and not more noisy protests.
All right, Ben, in West Yorkshire, thank you. Asda workers have won the latest round of their fight for equal pay. The case at the Supreme Court was brought by store workers, mostly women, who want to be paid the same as the distribution staff, who are mainly men. Well, Martha Fairley is at the Supreme Court. So, Martha, a significant victory, but still a long way to go.
Yes, this is the next step in a complex claim that dates back to an employment tribunal in 2016. Now, more than 40,000 Asda store workers, who two-thirds of which are women, complained that the staff working in distribution depots, who are mainly men, were unfairly paid between £1.50 and £3 an hour more than them. Today, the Supreme Court judges agreed that Asda store staff can compare themselves to distribution staff for equal pay purposes, and that has delighted Wendy Arundale, who worked at Asda for 30 years along with her husband.
Both of us did the same role, but he was paid more than I was. Yes, it annoyed me, it makes me feel a little bit cheesed off. Why should that happen? We're now in the 21st century, we should be equal. It's about time we were equal.
Now, the store workers still have to go through the process of proving that their work was equally difficult and demanding and of equal value to that done by the distribution depot workers, according to Linda Wong, who is from the law firm that represents the store workers.
Unfortunately, it's not the end. You know, we've put to bed the very first stage of the equal pay fight. There are 3 stages to it. It means that we can now focus on the other 2 stages, but that could still take a number of years.
Despite the ruling, Asda are standing by their position and say we are defending these claims because the pay in our stores and distribution centres is the same for colleagues doing the same job, regardless of their gender. Retail and distribution are very different sectors with their own distinct skill sets and pay rates. They are confident in their case, but this opens the way for the legal process by the store workers to continue.
All right, Martha, at the Supreme Court, thank you. In the last hour, we have had the latest figures on coronavirus infection rates from the Office for National Statistics, and they are encouraging. Our science editor, Tom Clark, is here. So, Tom, what do they show?
I suppose the best analysis of what the numbers are showing is they're as good as we could have perhaps expected, given the situation we're in right now. Cases were coming down very sharply since that peak in January due to lockdown. There was some concern, though, when schools went back, we would inevitably see a rise of infections. And I think what today's numbers show, with schools having been back 3 full school weeks now in terms of school days, we are beginning to see just a trend towards a slight increase in infections in school-aged children. And that's why overall across the country, the analysis, the figures are level. They're levelled off, because I think we're seeing rates declining in every other age group still as a result of lockdown and social distancing, but we're seeing a slight uptick in school-aged children. That might be due to the lateral flow testing that's being rolled out in schools to keeping those numbers under check as well. We've also got the R number that's just come out. This is that measures the growth rate of the epidemic. Perhaps not surprisingly, it's gone up a tiny bit from, it was 0.6 to 0.9 last week, still below 1, which means the outbreak is still shrinking. It's now up to 0.7 to 0.9, probably reflecting that slight increase in school-age kids. Obviously, schools break up next week, and that will be that will pause infections there. But remember, we're also opening up slightly on Monday, with us able to visit our family members in gardens and things, which could have a sort of compensative effect. So eyes on the numbers, but for the time being, pretty flat.
All right, we'll have to see what impact that beginning of the easing of restrictions has.
That's what I'm watching for now.
Thank you. Claims of rape, sexual assault and harassment have been made at several leading independent schools. It followed the outpouring of concern about women's safety after the killing of Sarah Everard, and the number of claims has escalated. Now the focus is on what schools are going to do about it. Well, Eugene Dutoy is head teacher at Wellington School in Somerset, and he joins me now. Thanks so much for joining us this lunchtime. First of all, just to make very clear, you've had no allegations at your school, but you wanted to tackle this issue head on, didn't you? So what changes have you already implemented there?
Well, good afternoon. You're right. We want to make sure that children leave Wellington equipped with all the skills they need to thrive in the 21st century. And so what we do at Wellington has to prepare our children and get them thinking about the world that they'll be going into. So the question that I've asked the school staff, our students and our parents is about our pastoral structures and what we need to do in our pastoral structures to have girls and boys working together, learning together, playing together, getting to know one another really well. So we have examined our house structures, we're examining our tutor groups, we're examining our sports, and we're asking students, parents and colleagues whether what we're doing is right for our children as they move towards the 21st century.
So you've been consulting with parents and students. So what have they come back to you with? What are they saying?
Well, we are a co-ed school, and we have been a co-ed school for a long time. But the question I put to the community, our family, was, should we be doing more to embed the extent to which we're co-ed? So mixing houses, mixing tutor groups, mixing sports. And it's been really, really interesting. There's a huge appetite for amongst students, parents and colleagues to do more together. So completely integrate houses, girls, boys, borders, ages. So really integrate houses And the conversation now is whether we do that in our tutor groups as well. So have girls and boys working together, sharing ideas, sharing conversations that perhaps previously would have been more difficult to share. But given where we are, given what's happening, given the world that we're living in, I fervently believe that girls and boys need to be really working together, not just sitting alongside one another, to build a deep understanding and sensitivity and an empathy for one another so that they can go into the 21st century and thrive.
And of course, following what happened to Sarah Everard, there has been this push, hasn't there, to make women and girls safe. And it seems to be that schools would be a logical starting point. But are you surprised that the dialogue around all this has just taken so long?
Yeah, it's so important that we have this conversation as a society, as schools, as families. And I'm glad that we're having it. I couldn't be more happy that we're having it, although obviously under difficult and tragic circumstances. And I speak as the father of 2 girls. I want our daughters working and living in a society where they feel safe and where girls and boys, men and women understand each other more deeply and have greater empathy for one another. So this is a good time to be having this conversation, and I'm very, very pleased that we're having it. And Wellington will be moving forward positively and progressively to make sure that girls and boys leave Wellington as young women and young men ready to really thrive in the 21st century.
Well, listen, let's hope that all the measures that you're putting in start to reap the benefits. Eugene du Toit, thank you so much for joining us this lunchtime and speaking to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come this lunchtime, helping the NHS workers who have helped so many others over the last year. And a final night under the stars for the little boy who spent a year in a tent. But first, if you live in Wales, from tomorrow you are allowed to go on holiday within Wales only. But with Easter and school holidays around the corner, it's a welcome freedom after a very long winter. Well, Jessica Main is in West Wales, where people are getting ready for the relaxation in rules tomorrow. She sent this a little earlier.
When First Minister Mark Drakeford first announced these changes 2 weeks ago, he said they'd only be possible if the public health situation continued to improve. That is obviously the case, and from tomorrow that stay local restriction will be lifted, meaning people in Wales can travel freely throughout the country. It also means self-contained accommodation, so those who don't share facilities will be able to accept visitors once again. It's a huge relief for owners, like at this caravan park near Aberyron. Today's announcement also sees changes to the number of people who can meet up outside. It's now 6 people instead of 4 from 2 households, and open-air monuments and gardens can also reopen. The next review will look at schools going back, but for now, for those people who were hoping for an Easter break, it'll be a huge relief and a chance to see loved ones.
Jessica Main reporting there. So more freedom in Wales for the Easter break than in England, but there will be some relaxation of restrictions from Monday. Shihab Khan is at Westminster. Shihab, so this is the beginning of the government's roadmap out of all of this, isn't it? And a very early stage so far, but it seems to be going to plan so far?
Yeah, it does. So in England on Monday, you'll have the rule of 6 back into force. So 6 people or 2 households will be able to meet in an outdoor setting. On top of that, outdoor sports facilities will be reopening, and outdoor formal sports will be allowed to recommence. On top of that, that stay-at-home message that we've heard so many times, that will be dropped, but people will still be encouraged to minimise their journeys. That's what's happening on Monday. The next step after that is dependent on the COVID situation, and that's not until the 12th of April. At that moment, non-essential shops, gyms and hairdressers will be reopening if everything goes to plan. For one, I'm really looking forward to that because I desperately need a haircut, and I know plenty of people at home will be feeling the same way, but that is purely dependent on the situation at the time. Now, as we continue to move through the government's roadmap and ease restrictions, questions are being asked about whether or not you will need to provide proof that you've had a vaccine to attend pubs, bars or restaurants, their so-called vaccine passports that have been spoken about so much in the last few days. What we know is that the government is considering it. No decision has been made so far. The Prime Minister was keen to emphasise that in the last couple of days. We know that a review is underway. They're looking at a range of options, potentially combining it with testing, but we don't know the finer details. We don't know exactly when that will come in, but we'll know for sure in early April when the review and the announcement of the review comes in.
All right, Shihab, yeah, we're all waiting for that haircut, aren't we? Thank you. A giant container ship remains stuck sideways in Egypt's Suez Canal for the fourth day running. Authorities are urgently trying to free the vessel and reopen traffic in the crucial waterway for global shipping. The ship, called the Ever Given, ran aground on Tuesday, leaving dozens of ships stranded. And Taylor Swift has shared the first of 6 previously unreleased songs from her re-recorded version of the album Fearless. The singer is re-releasing her old music following a high-profile and bitter row over the ownership of her early career songs. Over the last year, we have shown appreciation for our frontline workers as they battled away in overstretched hospitals and on the front line during the pandemic. But according to research by King's College London, nearly half of medics working in intensive care and anaesthetists are now experiencing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, severe depression or anxiety. Well, the charity says now must be the time to help those who have helped so many others in the last year. Helen Keenan reports.
When you're asked to give your everything to helping others, something has to be sacrificed.
For Chloe, the sacrifice she made was her own well-being, working tirelessly as a mental health nurse during the coronavirus crisis.
I was just tunnel vision focused on helping frontline workers and their mental health and their well-being and making sure that they're able to cope. And I had no time or attention for my family or my friends or anyone. My husband has had to step up and be mum and be dad. My daughter now used to always prefer me and now she prefers my husband, which is great in a way, but it's a constant reminder of just that breakdown of relationship there, I guess.
Chloe is among almost 2,000 NHS workers who have signed up to Duty to Care, a mental health charity in London that is fundraising to continue supporting healthcare workers during the pandemic. Brenda decided to speak to a therapist after COVID added to the grief she was already experiencing. Her husband passed away from cancer, and Brenda was inspired to retrain as a nurse.
Even in healthcare, there's still quite a stigma around mental health and getting extra support. And I think we want to look after our patients and we are the helper, we're the caregivers. So it can be difficult to say, I actually need a bit of help.
Nearly half of medics working in intensive care in England are experiencing PTSD symptoms, including severe depression and anxiety, and half of ICU staff have needed psychological support.
We've scratched the surface of demand. I think initially there was a lot of shock and anxiety-related referrals, but I think now there's a real sense of what I could only describe as bone-weary fatigue.
As the country begins moving out of lockdown, there is concern the next NHS crisis will be the impact the pandemic has had on its staff's mental health. Helen Keenan, ITV News.
And finally, when the country went into lockdown last March, Max Woozys went outside into a tent in his garden. The 11-year-old started the adventure to raise money for a hospice in Devon, which looked after a family friend. Well, 12 months later, he's raised more than £300,000 and he wants other children to join him and camp out on the anniversary tomorrow. Lewis Warner reports.
In March last year, Max Woozys pitched up his tent and decided to camp outside for all of lockdown. At the time, the 11-year-old had no idea that 1 year on, he'd still be sleeping outside, spurred on by the thousands of donations to a charity close to his heart.
My neighbour Rick unfortunately died of cancer. Before he died, he gave me a tent and said, I want you to have an adventure on it. The North Devon Hospice who took such good care of him. Unfortunately, their fundraising was cut, so I wanted to be able to keep my promise and help them out.
Hunkered down in the back garden of his Devonshire home, Max has braved the delights of British weather. This morning, the amount of money raised topped £300,000, a milestone that his first tent hasn't survived to see. Max is now living in his 6th tent, and even that's on its last legs.
We are now the world's most expert tent putter-uppers after putting up tents every 2 or 3 days for the last year.
Tomorrow marks 1 year since Max set out on his challenge, and he's encouraging children around the world to join in, either camping in a garden or making a den at home, a lockdown challenge with charity in mind. Lewis Warner, ITV News.
Oh, great work, Max. A reminder of our main stories this lunchtime. A secondary school in West Yorkshire has told all pupils to stay at home today as protests continue following a religious studies lesson where the class was shown satirical cartoons depicting the Prophet Muhammad. Well, a teacher at the school has been suspended. And if you live in Wales, from tomorrow you're allowed to go on holiday within Wales as coronavirus travel restrictions there are lifted. And that's it. I'm back with the ITV Evening News at 6:30. The news where you are follows the national weather. But for now, from everyone on the Lunchtime team, bye-bye.